Jean-Luc Picard is not just one of the most iconic characters in Star Trek, but across science fiction as a whole.
You mother you're gonna kill all my lilies!
I challenge you to pick a captain of a starship that exudes confidence and experience more than Picard. He's not cheeky, he's not flashy, he's efficient, capable, dedicated, and passionate.
Not now, Doctor.
It's an overwhelming mix, and makes it so that, as an audience, you never question his authority as not only the captain of Starfleet's flagship, but also as the person in charge of equally capable legends like Riker, Data, Worf, and literally every other hyper-competent character on the Enterprise D. Even beings like Q and Guinan agree he's special.
I'm attracted to bald men.
But, as special as he is, there is one part of him that doesn't make him unique. He is not the Enterprise D's only captain. And no, I'm not talking about the time Riker became captain for a day, but that two-parter is my favorite episode of the whole series. I'm talking about Captain Jellico, a captain that, on paper, feels like the opposite of Picard. He's quiet, militaristic, forgettable, uninterested in crew morale, and has probably never done Shakespeare in the Park.
My love is a fever.
But regardless of how you feel about him, Jellico was the captain of the Enterprise for a time. And if Picard's mission away from the ship had gone south, he may have remained captain for the foreseeable future, which is exactly the scenario we'll be exploring today. What if Jellico had remained captain of the Enterprise D? Let's see what happens. But before that, I just want to give a quick shout out to my husband. Jellico is one of his favorite characters in TNG, and I'm making this video for his birthday. Happy birthday, sweetie. Enjoy.
Enjoy it.
Before we get into what changes, let's set the stage. It begins with the two-parter Chain of Command. With much of the Enterprise D crew kept in the dark, Starfleet has formulated a risky plan. Vice Admiral Alina Nechayev hands over command of the flagship to Edward Jellico. While telling the crew it's due to his experience with Cardassians, a vital piece of experience as their occupation of Bajor and the events of DS9 are about to begin. It's truly to give Picard an opportunity to complete a secret mission on Keltris 3. Now, in the normal timeline, Picard's mission is ultimately a trap to hold him ransom. He's captured, tortured, but eventually released thanks to Captain Jellico using mines to hold a Cardassian fleet hostage. Picard is safely returned to his ship and resumes his post as captain of the Enterprise D, with war avoided. For now. However, we want to see what will happen if Jellico remains captain, and the most obvious circumstance to allow for that is Picard doesn't return to the Enterprise. There are three major options for this. Picard escapes capture but is lost in Cardassian space, Picard dies during the mission, and lastly, Picard betrays the Federation and joins the Cardassians, having been broken by the torture at the hands of Gul Madred. That last option feels like the most unlikely, but as Picard states at the end of the two-parter, he would have told Madred anything to end the torture. But I refuse to write a story where Picard actually betrays the Federation. That's wild even for the Mirror Universe. So we're left with either Picard dying or escaping and going on the run in Cardassian space as a fugitive. As much as I love the idea of Picard having to make his way back to the ship, using all of his skill, experience, and contacts to do so, this leaves us with too many unknowns and random variables to really base a theory around. Thus, with a heavy heart, I have no choice but to make this change to Chain of Command. Jean-Luc Picard, after being captured by Gul Madred, is tortured for information that he can't possibly give, and despite his best efforts to persist, ultimately succumbs to the horrendous treatment and dies in Madred's torture chamber. Captain Jellico's plan to mine the Cardassian fleet and use it as leverage to free Picard goes as well as it does in the original timeline. However, when he makes the final demand for them to free Picard, Gul Lamek informs him that only hours ago, Captain Picard succumbed to wounds sustained in his mission and passed away.
Merde.
Picard's body is returned to the Enterprise D, and his crew, with Riker taking lead, gives him a worthy eulogy. With Picard gone and relations with Cardassians as fragile as ever, the Enterprise needs a captain capable of handling what's to come. Admiral Nechayev agrees that Jellico should retain his post as captain of the Federation's flagship. But how will the Enterprise fare without Picard? And what role will the ship play in future events, now that it has a captain like Jellico? Let's find out. There are immediate changes for the crew of the Enterprise, and many more serious than a fourth duty shift and Troi wearing her uniform. Riker's opinion of working with Jellico, and vice versa, has not changed. After relieving him of duty before, Jellico refuses to return him to his position as first officer. Riker requests to be reassigned, and Admiral Nechayev gives him the captain's seat of the USS Crazy Horse. Data is made a full commander and officially takes on the role of first officer. Although it was ultimately a fabrication, in the episode Future Imperfect, we see a future where Worf takes over for Data as chief operations officer, a fact that Riker doesn't consider unbelievable. Thus, I don't think anyone would question Jellico's decision to have Worf take over Data's former position and be officially made second officer. Although officers like Lieutenant Barnaby were considered, Ensign Gates, who has been a capable con officer through encounters with the Zalkonians, Children of Tama, and the Borg, and who is a skilled student of Worf's Klingon Mokbara combat training, is promoted to lieutenant and takes over as chief of security. Despite her history with Riker, Troi does not transfer with him and remains on board the Enterprise to help her friends through this transition.
I feel completely out of control.
Geordi and Beverly remain in their current positions as well. Guinan, however, without saying a word to anyone, leaves the ship quietly. One day the crew enters 10 forward and she's just gone. With our new Enterprise D bridge crew set, let's take a look at how the rest of their adventures would go. After this, the Enterprise rendezvous with DS9, newly under Federation protection. Chief O'Brien and Keiko are beamed aboard, and Jellico is the one to meet with Sisko. It's a less intense exchange, considering Jellico wasn't a part of the Borg cube that killed Sisko's wife. The events of Ship in a Bottle are unlikely to happen at all, what with Jellico's 4-duty shift roster providing Data and Geordi with less time to live out Sherlock Holmes' mysteries in the holodeck. Thus, they probably wouldn't stumble onto a technical issue that causes Barclay to reactivate Moriarty. And even if they did, I have a feeling Jellico wouldn't spend the time on this issue that Picard did. Whether he returns Moriarty to storage or deletes his program entirely, this episode's conflict is ended quickly so Jellico can focus on the mission at hand. Side note, Barclay as an officer doesn't feel like someone Jellico would keep around. If he had issues with Riker's approach to command, I doubt Jellico would have the patience for Barclay. I'm not saying he immediately reassigns him, but I could see it happening. Aquiel and Face of the Enemy play out very similarly. Even without Picard's connection to Gowron and Spock, I'm sure Jellico could handle these situations very well, especially the Klingons. Jellico kind of has Klingon energy. Without Picard's heart condition, even if Jellico suffers wounds in the episode Tapestry, they wouldn't be nearly as severe. Despite even less enthusiasm for the work he specifically has to do on DS9, I think Jellico's presence over Picard wouldn't cause much change during Birthright. Next, the biggest question we have in the episode Starship Mine is, would Jellico go back to the ship for a saddle to get out of an awkward conversation? Well, I think a major thing Picard and Jellico have in common is their distaste for mindless small talk. So I see no reason to think that Jellico wouldn't also sneak back aboard the Enterprise to avoid speaking with Commander Hutchinson. And I see him equally as capable as Picard in defending the ship and thwarting the smugglers during the Baryon sweep a la sci-fi Kevin McAllister.
This is my house. I have to defend it.
As well, I think even without Riker, the crew on the surface would be able to handle the hostage situation with ease. As he's married to a woman named Deborah,
It's Deborah now.
the episode Lessons wouldn't have the conflict caused by Picard's budding romance with Lieutenant Commander Nella Darren. The Chase is the first episode where I feel the lack of Picard has a significant and undeniable change. Without Picard's presence, there's no reason for his former teacher Galen to rendezvous with the Enterprise and provide the artifacts and clues that lead the Enterprise on a treasure hunt towards the progenitors. And without Picard's presence, the Romulans, Cardassians, and Klingons are left to hunt on their own. And as we see in the episode, cooperation is needed to reach the end of their journey. It's more likely that these other crews would kill each other rather than work together. And in destroying each other, they take all of the clues to the grave with them. Since Klingon Captain Nudak destroyed all life on Indri 8, no one will ever be able to pick up where they left off, and the chase ends unsuccessfully. Without Riker, there's no Frame of Mind episode, and there's little to no change in suspicions either. Rightful Heir also plays out the same, as I believe Jellico would give Worf time off the ship just as Picard does. It's the right thing to do to keep his second officer invested and focused on his duties. Second Chances sees our next major change. Beaming down to Narvala 4, Data, Worf, and Gates are met by Riker? But how is that possible? Riker's the captain of the Crazy Horse. Well, our team of hyper-competent individuals soon learn that after a massive energy surge, the transporter chief of Riker's former ship, the Potemkin, created a second containment beam, and because of science stuff, a second Riker was formed. Since our Riker isn't here on this mission, there's less conflict and an easier transition for this new Riker. He's able to call Captain Riker on the Crazy Horse and have an awkward but needed conversation with his twin. But without that tension on the mission, things move much smoother. Lieutenant Riker is able to fix things relatively quickly, and in doing so, avoids the close call that nearly kills him in the original timeline. The mission ends successfully, and this new Riker, taking up the name Thomas, resumes his relationship with Troy as he does in the original episode. The big change comes in what he does at the end. Thomas expresses his desire to Jellico to resume his Starfleet career. As Jellico's familiar with how skilled Riker is at the con, showcased when he mined a Cardassian fleet during Chain of Command Part 2, he decides to give Lieutenant Thomas Riker a post on the Enterprise as his new lead con officer. This means that he does not leave the ship to join the Gandhi, and since he's now working on the Enterprise, he and Troy can pursue their relationship in earnest, something Captain Riker gives his blessing for. We leave second chances with a Riker once again back on the Enterprise D, and back on Troy, if you know what I... Timescape plays out the same as in the original timeline, which brings us to the Season 6 finale, Descent. This also sees the return of Admiral Nechayev. She meets with Captain Jellico, discussing Picard's decision to return the Borg Hugh to the Collective and giving up the chance to rid the galaxy of the Borg once and for all. Jellico ultimately respects Picard's choice. He tells the Admiral, "If a mission demands it, I will sacrifice one of my soldiers. But those people had a choice in joining Starfleet, and my crew. Hugh didn't have a choice. I wouldn't let an innocent civilian sacrifice themselves for a mission, and I'm proud to hear that Picard felt the same." Regardless of Picard or Jellico's opinion on the matter, the mission continues as per the Admiral's wishes. The Enterprise is assigned the USS Agamemnon and the USS Crazy Horse as backup. This brings back Captain Riker, who has his first face-to-face meeting with Lieutenant Riker. There's tension, but the distance between them helps ease things along. Descent Part 1 ends the same, with Geordi, Troy, and this time Jellico, captured by Data, Lore, and their own Borg collective. Descent Part 2 sees Lieutenant Commander Worf and Lieutenant Riker finding several rebellious Borg led by Hugh. Hugh recognizes them both and tells them that they cannot understand the loneliness he and the other Borg have felt since the Enterprise left. But Thomas Riker says he's never met Hugh before. He explains who he is and how this Riker understands loneliness better than anyone. He spent 8 years alone with no hope of rescue. Hugh can feel that connection and ultimately still decides to help them. However, things are not looking very good for Geordi, Troy, and Jellico. They're imprisoned and at the whim of Lore and Data's experiments. In the normal timeline, Picard's able to sneak a transceiver off of a Borg drone, and they use it to remotely interfere with Lore's control over Data. But Jellico doesn't have Picard's knowledge of Borg technology, and likely wouldn't have known to grab this device. Thus, the three of them are powerless to stop Data, and his experiment on Geordi, to replace parts of his brain with cybernetic components, is successful. Data tells Geordi he only had a 60% chance of survival, but luckily, he does survive, but not unchanged. After Geordi is altered, Jellico is taken out of the holding cell by Lore and Data. In order to prove his loyalty, Lore commands Data to kill Jellico. Without the transceiver loosening Lore's grip over Data, he has no reason to disobey. Just as he's about to fire, Hugh jumps forward and attacks both Lore and Data. Riker, Worf, and the other rebellious Borg attack as well. Lore is hit, and his control over Data is weakened. In this moment of clarity, just as in the original timeline, Data is able to fire on and deactivate his brother. With the threat under control thanks to Hugh, the crew returns to the Enterprise who, thanks to Beverly and Ensign Tate, was able to destroy the Borg ship. Crusher is able to stabilize Geordi, but unlike in the main timeline, there is permanent change. His mind is almost entirely cybernetic, and while this increases his cognitive abilities, it's likely to come with yet unknown side effects. After these events, Jellico seriously considers relieving Data of duty, permanently, but, thanks to the insistence of Geordi himself, decides against it. Since Data was being manipulated and controlled, his actions can't be attributed to him, but to Lore. Data questions the choice, but Jellico reassures him that the best thing he can do to make up for what has happened is perform his duties as first officer to the absolute best of his abilities. Continuing into Season 7, we can comfortably move past liaisons and interface. Though I can see Jellico handling the emotionally charged situation of liaisons differently than Picard. However, I think the Iarian ambassadors would leave the encounter learning just as much about human emotions as before. And interface may even go smoother now that Geordi has been cybernetically enhanced. The two-parter Gambit normally saw Picard impersonating a smuggler to uncover an ancient Vulcan psionic artifact. But, since Jellico isn't an archaeology nerd, I don't think he would do the same unless ordered to do so. Thus, the search for the artifact continues without the Enterprise's involvement. And judging by how Picard describes their efforts, without his skill improving their accuracy, I imagine they're going to be looking for that artifact for many, many more years. And even if they do find it, and the undercover Vulcan isolationist T'Pol is able to use it against other Vulcans, she'll discover how ineffective it is against those who can control their anger. The psionic device will be destroyed, and the mercenaries detained by the Vulcans, regardless of whether the Enterprise is involved or not. In Phantasms, it's Jellico who's invited to the Admiral's banquet thing. But just like in the original timeline, the Enterprise is delayed due to interphasic beings, Data's nightmares, and everyone filling up on Troy cake.
Don't! No! No!
In fact, we don't see any notable difference in Season 7 again until the Pegasus. Since the Admiral originally rendezvoused with the Enterprise through the Crazy Horse, and really only went there to work with Riker, he instead searches for the Pegasus on the Crazy Horse with Captain Riker. The Enterprise has nothing to do with this mission in our timeline. Thus, Captain Riker has to overcome his past demons with this mission and stand up to the Admiral alone. Something I believe he's more than capable of doing, even without Picard there to guide him. Thus, instead of helping with the Pegasus mission, around Stardate 47457.1, the Enterprise could instead decide to aid former crew member O'Brien with dismantling harvesters, deadly biomechanical gene disruptors, in the DS9 episode Armageddon game, helping them finish faster, but departing before things get crazy. There are no changes in Homeward or Sub Rosa.
That you're an 800-year-old ghost?
And in Thine Own Self, it's Worf, not Riker, who evaluates Troy for the bridge officer's test that sees her attain the rank of commander. In Eye of the Beholder, Troy doesn't find herself romantically involved with Worf, as her and Thomas Riker are still going strong. Journey's End sees the return of Wesley Crusher in an episode where Jellico is given a mission to relocate Native Americans and... Okay, Jellico won't be happy about this mission, and I'm not happy about this episode. This is one of many Star Trek episodes that stereotype and misrepresent Native American culture and traditions. Throw in the rushed ending to Wesley's character, and this episode is not a fun one to rewatch. Let's just say things end the same and move on, okay? The episode Bloodlines doesn't occur at all, as there's no Picard for Bok to get revenge upon. Preemptive Strike sees the next major change. Though Jellico doesn't have the connection to Ro Laren that Picard had, she still meets with him when she returns after her advanced tactical training. With her usual honesty, she tells him she has trouble seeing anyone but Picard in the captain's seat. She took his death very hard, and has been thinking about all he taught her and gave her in the time they worked together. Honoring Picard's faith in her, she still accepts the mission to infiltrate the Maquis. She bonds with the Maquis, especially Matthias, and losing him in a firefight with the Cardassians affects her greatly. Losing him and Picard, Ro feels adrift. When she meets Jellico in the bar to be given the next part of her mission, she agrees to go through with it. Unlike in the original timeline, where she betrays Starfleet to join the Maquis, inheriting Picard's will after his death is stronger than anything she experiences here. She meets with Jellico after the mission successfully captures many Maquis agents and disables their ships. He thanks her on behalf of all of Starfleet, and Ro replies, "I didn't do it for Starfleet. It's been a long time since I felt like I belonged somewhere. Losing Picard made me wish that I had been here. Maybe I could have done something. It took losing someone great, like him, to make me realize my place is on this ship, upholding his ideals, not Starfleet's. Thank me? Thank Picard." And Rose storms out of his office. Jellico, as he has done over his year and a half as captain of the Enterprise, chooses to respect the ship's former captain's wishes. And not only does he offer Ro her old position, but he recommends her for promotion. Despite how difficult it is to serve under a different captain of the Enterprise, Ro returns to her post as the ship's con officer, and Lieutenant Riker is transferred to operations, where he works under Lieutenant Commander Worf. Before the finale, as we heard in the DS9 episode Tribunal, Starfleet Command has ordered the USS Enterprise D to the Federation Cardassian border near the demilitarized zone. As much as Jellico may want to get more involved in releasing O'Brien from the Cardassians, he takes no further action beyond what his orders are. Which brings us to the finale, the final episode of The Next Generation, All Good Things. The trial of humanity has not ended, but without Picard, Q's interest in the Enterprise has. Q remains focused on humanity, as he always has, but does so from a much greater distance. He watches as though through a screen, like a viewer of one of the greatest television shows of all time, wishing the best did not have to end. And luckily for us, things don't end. Not yet, at least. After the events of TNG end, the Enterprise D is given a refit, and we begin the first movie, Star Trek Generations. The events of this film play out remarkably similar, but in our timeline, it does act as the return of Guinan. After leaving the Enterprise when Picard died, I wondered where she might go after losing such a friend. And I thought, what if Guinan decided to open up a new bar on Earth? Somewhere that reminded her of her old friend. Somewhere she could serve his favorite alcohol. Somewhere she could check in on his loved ones. When Jellico and the Enterprise look for advice regarding Soren and the Nexus, they visit Guinan near Picard Vineyards on Earth. Guinan, having opened up a wine bar nearby, has formed a close bond with Picard's family. She helps her old shipmates as best she can, and the Enterprise has no trouble thwarting Soren's plan. But the major change here that's worthy of note is, with Guinan watching over Picard's family, guiding them as she once did Picard himself, the tragedy that befell his family is avoided. The fire that could have taken the lives of his brother and nephew is averted, and the Picard line does not die away. Guinan watches over the Picard family, and proudly sees Picard's nephew Rene as he eventually joins Starfleet, following in the footsteps of his uncle. Though this video is specifically about the captain's seat of the Enterprise D, let's take a quick little peek into the future after that famous ship's destruction.
Yes!
After the events of the first movie, Starfleet commissions a new flagship, the Enterprise E, but Jellico's not offered the captain's chair. He's instead promoted to Vice Admiral, and is given command of the Federation's military efforts in the Dominion War, working alongside Benjamin Sisko and Worf. The Enterprise E is thus captained by Elizabeth Shelby. With her exemplary record, experience as first officer of the Enterprise D during its most dangerous mission, and her experience with major threats like the Borg, she's one of Starfleet's top candidates. Commander Data retains his position as first officer, and Troy, Geordi, and Crusher remain in their positions as well. Geordi is eventually able to adjust to his cybernetic mind, and it ultimately makes enhancements to his vision that much easier to attain. As terrible as it could have been, Data's alterations end up being a good thing. Data is pretty dang skilled after all. With Worf now at DS9, Lieutenant Riker is made Lieutenant Commander and becomes Chief of Operations and Second Officer. Lieutenant Rowe, with her advanced tactical training, is made Chief of Security and Tactical Officer when Lieutenant Gates transfers to join Captain Riker on the USS Crazy Horse. Lieutenant Hawk then takes over as Con Officer. With this new crew in place, the Enterprise E is the one to handle the conflict in Star Trek First Contact. And let's just say, the Borg Queen is really going to meet her match when she faces off against Captain Shelby. I definitely took my share of artistic license with this theory, and I think it's bordering more on the fanfic than it is on the theory, but it was a really fun one to do. And ultimately, as long as one person in this audience enjoyed it, one in particular, then I did my job well. Happy birthday, sweetie. Thanks for watching!